Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are grateful to the committee for its tireless efforts in solidarity with the Palestinian people and for gathering us today at a time of paramount urgency for collective action to uphold our legal, political, humanitarian, and moral obligations to prevent genocide, to ensure accountability and justice, and to finally bring an end to Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine. I wish to join you in welcoming our esteemed briefers, UN Special Rapporteurs, Ms. Francesca Albanese and Dr. Tala Lang Mofokeng, Honorable Commissioner Chris Sidoti. We look forward to your presentations of your powerful reports alongside numerous joint statements that you have issued as Special Rapporteurs concerning all of aspects of the grave human rights situation of the Palestinian people under Israel's illegal occupation. I also wish to welcome Ms. Diana Buttu from the Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights and Ms. Anisha Patel from Law for Palestine and stress civil society's crucial role in our joint pursuit of justice. Mr. Chair, we have said it continually. The Nakba against the Palestinian people never ended. No chapter darker than that which our people in Gaza have suffered for the past year. The absence of accountability has permitted Israel's unbridled impunity, its politicians, military, and settler militias descending to unimaginable depths of cruelty and depravity, inflicting unfathomable terror, trauma, loss, and devastation on the Palestinian people. A situation equated to, quote, hell on earth, a betrayal of our humanity, a stain on the world's conscience. Tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, babies, children, women, men, youth, elderly, have been killed. 902 families exterminated in their entirety. Thousands more civilians are unaccounted for, crushed to death under rubble, bodies shredded or burned beyond recognition, or buried in mass graves. Over 100,000 people injured and maimed, thousands abducted, imprisoned in Israeli torture camps, many killed in captivity. 2 million people forcibly displaced over and over again, hunted down by Israel's occupation forces from one corner of Gaza to the other, where over 80% of civilian infrastructure has been decimated and nowhere is safe. Today, north of Gaza is the epicenter of Israel's genocidal onslaught. Those not killed by Israel's weapons are being starved to death and ravaged by disease as the occupying power continues its siege of Gaza, obstructing aid and depriving our people of food, water, medicine, and all essentials for human survival, targeting hospitals and aid workers, deliberately imposing conditions of life intended to collectively punish, to torment, to force departure, to destroy our people, forcing them to choose between ethnic cleansing, genocide, or surrender and submission to its settler colonial domination and apartheid regime. And yet, still, no accountability, no protection for the occupied, defenseless civilian population targeted by this genocidal wrath. Instead, there is rampant impunity, more atrocities, more colonization, more annexation, more persecution in Gaza and across the rest of occupied Palestine, in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Instead, war criminals are perennially shielded from accountability by the U.S. veto in the Security Council, by an inability or unwillingness to implement resolutions even when adopted, by a failure to uphold legal responsibilities and impose consequences in the face of flagrant violations and grave breaches of international law. It is the height of perversity, even as Israel violates every rule of law, every moral principle, every tenet of humanity, instead of being held responsible, instead of independent international investigations accountability, and consequences, Israel is actually the one taking punitive measures. The case of UNRWA is the most recent glaring example of this. Israel attacks UNRWA facilities, targets and destroys shelter for the displaced, killing and injuring thousands, murders UNRWA staff, obstructs its humanitarian mission, smears and libels the agency, and passes so-called legislation to outlaw it. Yet perversely, Israel claims it is the one under attack by the UN, even as it is the one waging an open war on the UN, not just on UNRWA, but on the Secretary General, on special rapporteurs and commissioners, on the Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, the ICJ, the ICC, on this committee, on every single country that dares to speak out, on the entire UN system and the international community it represents. It is a methodical, unprecedented, all-out attack in violation of the UN Charter, international law, and UN resolutions, and begging the question of how Israel remains a member of this organization. Instead of international law being upheld, as High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk has warned, the international rule of law is being progressively dismantled. But what we see in your work, special rapporteurs and commissioners, and civil society, are powerful testimonies to the facts and clarion calls for justice. We see that there are many who refuse to allow this dismantlement of international law, to allow the perversion of the law and perversion of the truth. We see those who will act with courage and principle to safeguard international law and insist on its respect, to uphold human rights universally and demand justice. We have tools afforded to us by international law to end this impunity and must use them as a matter of urgency. This has been the state of Palestine's abiding call for accountability for all the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide committed against the Palestinian people, and we remain unwavering in our commitment to realize justice for them. With the recent advisory opinion by the ICJ on the illegality of the Israeli occupation and the General Assembly resolution that followed, clearly affirming the obligations of all states to bring an end to this abhorrent situation, including by means of a halt to arms transfers, ending all dealings with settlements, and other measures of accountability. With the ICJ provisional measures orders in the case initiated by South Africa under the Genocide Convention, and with the mounting global awareness, protests, and demands for a ceasefire, for an end to the genocide, for an end to Israel's occupation, and for a free Palestine, we believe we are at a turning point. Although the days have never been darker, the prospects for justice and accountability have never been greater. The responsibilities of the international community are no longer up for debate. They are explicit and urgent. We must stop this genocide, hold perpetrators of war crimes accountable, and end this illegal, immoral, and inhumane occupation, which stands in defiance of every legal and moral principle. We owe it to the Palestinian people and to future generations in our region and around the world to preserve and uphold the rule of law, and to move beyond words and pursue justice with conviction. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would like to start by reading the remarks I started with yesterday as I presented my 5th report as a special rapporteur to the 3rd Committee of the General Assembly. In a year in which I was turned into a reluctant chronicler of genocide, I feel compelled to start by paying my respects to the victims and survivors of all genocides, past and present, including the Native Americans, like the Lenape people, who are the regional stewards of the land on which this institution stands. Certainly, the ongoing struggle of Native Americans and indigenous peoples everywhere to regain and maintain their rights on their ancestral land, like the Palestinians, would be less challenging if institutions like this one, premised upon equality and freedom of all and self-determination for all, were actually committed to addressing and unraveling the colonial past, beginning by confronting the prevailing colonial amnesia that affects many of them. And as Italian Holocaust survivor Primo Levi reminds us, it is the amnesia of the past and the erasure of its victims that allows history to repeat itself. And why did I start by reading this again and again? It's because history is repeating itself. Yesterday, I presented my second report on genocide. Why so? Why do I insist in calling it genocide? Because it's so difficult to prove intent. Why don't you go with war crimes and crimes against humanity? Because it's genocide. Because if you go to a doctor and you have cancer and you are diagnosed with fever, you have a problem, a big problem, and it's the same with the people who's being genocided. Because it's not about a collection of war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Palestinians are experiencing. They have experienced through their entire life as a people war crimes and crimes against humanity. But nowadays, the situation is different. And it's very important that we understand what is genocide and why this is to be recognized as a genocide. Because in the same way as the international community has failed to protect the victims of genocide in the case of the Jewish people in Europe, and then the Bosnians in former Yugoslavia, and then the Tutsi in Rwanda. In the same way, we are failing the Palestinians. And I want to express all my respect and solidarity with the Palestinian people, because it's a torment to be here as a Palestinian and having to tell all of us about the genocide that their people are experiencing. Because a people is like a body. You chop one arm, you chop one limb, the entire body suffers. And this is what a people is. It's something organic. And the same thing is the relation between the people and the land. For indigenous people, the land is not the place where they live. The land is who they are. And this is why we need to understand the bigger design behind what's happening in Palestine today. On the 14th of October, when together with other special rapporteurs, we started to denounce, to raise the alarm that what Israel had started to do might be genocide, and there was a serious risk of genocide. And then as of November, 30 of us have said a genocide is unfolding. I also said on the 14th of October, under the fog of war, Israel accelerates the forced displacement of the Palestinians. And I do say that out of the scholarship that I've produced, because the way I know the question of Palestine is through the forced displacement of its people, since even before the State of Israel was created. Palestinians have been kicked out of their land amid the destruction of their villages and everything they had from 1947-49 and in 1967, and it continues. And what's happening today, it's much more severe because of the technology, because of the weaponry, but also because of the impunity that has been granted to the State of Israel over 76 years. The hubris that has led Israel to attack not just the Palestinian people or the Lebanese, and to the Lebanese also goes my solidarity in this moment, but the United Nations. This year has also marked an attack against the United Nations physically, symbolically. In terms of functions, Israel has damaged or in any way bombed and targeted and hit 70% of UNRWA infrastructure in Gaza. It has launched a campaign, a smear campaign against UNRWA, which intensified a pattern that was already established. And it has killed 230 UN staff members, colleagues of many of those who work in this institution. And it has targeted the humanitarian capacity of UNRWA. And it has even targeted UN peacekeepers. And it has targeted the UN Secretary General and independent experts. And its very illustrious assembly. No one has been spared, not just among the Palestinians and the Lebanese, even in the United Nations. And it's because of that, on top of the genocide and on top of the 57 years of unlawful occupation, that I say it's time to consider suspending the credential of Israel as a member state. And I understand the sensitivity, because none of you has really clean hands when it comes to human rights. That's okay. But no one else has maintained an unlawful occupation violating decades of UN Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, International Court of Justice, decision and resolutions, as Israel has done. Enough. Enough. And the last point, genocide. While this is genocide, genocide is a very insidious crime. It's a process, it's not an act. And there is a significant jurisprudence, but still incipient jurisprudence, thankfully. And the critical element to determine genocide is the intent behind acts of killing and infliction harm and creating conditions of life leading to the destruction of a group as such. There is the intent. And the discussion I hear, including from scholars, well, it's difficult to prove the intent. The intent is not a motive. It's a different thing. Its intent is the determination to destroy through criminal acts. Motives can vary. One can commit genocide because of, or can develop the will, the determination to commit genocide to stay in power, or to liberate the hostages, or to commit other crimes. But the moment there is the determination to destroy, then the intent of genocide is formed, and you don't even need to have genocide unfolding to intervene. We have already failed the Palestinians. Genocide has already been committed. But we need to, first of all, intervene, stop and punish the perpetrators, and then to stop it because it's expanding to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. No Palestinians is safe under Israeli rule. And the other element, and with this I will conclude, what is critical is the responsibility of the state. We cannot apply the same threshold for alleged perpetrators, so criminal responsibility, to a state. Otherwise, if we have to look at the paradox, preventing genocide would be an impossible mission if we have to wait until the guarantees that fair trial afford to alleged perpetrators are satisfied. We will never prevent genocide. But here the responsibility of a state is evident, especially in a self-proclaimed rule of law system, which has checks and balances. It's not just the executive, it's the parliament and the judiciary. What have these bodies done in Israel to prevent genocide? Nothing. Not only, this is not the result of action of some members of the government. This is a collective responsibility of the state of Israel. And because of that, I say, this is the first settler colonial genocide to be litigated in human history. The cry for justice behind this case will resonate across the globe and will make a difference also for other indigenous people that have never seen a day of justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. I welcome this opportunity to speak to you here today. In my capacity as the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, we have watched the horror of a genocide unfold for over a year now, representing a display of recalcitrant, repugnant attitude of an occupying powers regime and its global allies. This has been an ongoing enactment of decades-long genocidal plans, systemic and sustained imperialist violence experienced by Palestinians every single day since the Nakba. 1 year later, the promise by Israeli leaders to destroy Gaza has been fulfilled. The Strip, now a wasteland of rubble and human remains, where survivors, many of them women, children, people who are disabled, the elderly, struggle to hold on to life amid deprivation and disease. An unknown number of people remain under rubble, bodies decomposing, including in the ruins of what used to be clinics and hospitals. The practice of medicine is under attack by Israel. Just days into this war, I warned that the Gaza's medical infrastructure was on the path of being irreparably damaged. That early warning system was ignored. Healthcare providers were working in a dire situation themselves, already under bombardment in the enclave. At the moment, according to the WHO, only 17 out of 36 hospitals are partially functioning. There have been 516 attacks on health facilities, with 765 people killed in those attacks. We have many people still requiring urgent medical evacuations for uptake and upgrade in care. All hospitals have insufficient and unreliable power. They struggle to save lives amid critical shortages of not just healthcare workers, but also trickling supplies of medical equipment and items that are necessary. Not only is Israel killing and causing irreparable harm against Palestinian people with bombardments, but Israel and their allies are also knowingly and intentionally imposing famine and dehydration. I remain concerned at the ongoing risks of water and airborne diseases, the many complex injuries that are resulting from the kinds of military arsenal that is used, as well as new and developing disabilities and complications created from a lack of timeous intervention for both medical and surgical care. Pregnant women are not receiving adequate nutrition and health care. Children, especially under 5, continue to be at high risk of severe malnutrition, placing a whole generation in danger of suffering from stunting, which causes irreparable physical and cognitive impairment. There are no guarantees regarding consistency of medical supplies with insufficient water, inadequate sanitation, food, medicines. Healthcare facilities, including ambulances, have been critically affected. The protracted violence makes much of the population in need of psychological and mental support and psychological first aid impossible to provide. The ongoing situation is untenable. My mandate has received information regarding arrests, detention of healthcare workers, demonstrating again a pattern, including arrest of medical personnel while they are on duty, medical personnel being forced to evacuate hospitals, and some immediately arrested. Some are dying under these circumstances and reportedly being beaten in prison with their bodies showing signs of torture. Most recently, a colleague of mine, Dr. Ziad Eldadou, was a third doctor confirmed to have died while being detained by Israel. He was an internal medicine physician in Al-Shifa Hospital. He was detained along with other healthcare workers while on duty on 18th March 2024. This was during a raid by Israeli forces, and he was in detention and he reportedly died on the 21st of March 2024. The number of widespread violations of the special protection afforded to civilians and violations related to lack of protection of medical personnel under international human rights law and international human rights law have been immeasurable. The destruction of health systems created by this genocide is incompatible with the realization of the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Israel and its allies have ignored the International Court of Justice, the UN experts, and they continue to commit an immeasurable number of violations against civilians, children, medical personnel. Israel is obligated to protect, promote, and respect human rights of all individuals. I have communicated to the member state Israel in an urgent appeal some of my concerns. The long-term trauma of people in Gaza will carry with them, because of this enduring intergenerational physical and mental health impacts of structural discrimination, of racism and violence. We are yet to fully quantify or even develop a matrix to measure the true impact of this genocide, its compounding nature, of what was never a situation that was conducive to the right to health even before October the 7th. All immediate and future interventions aimed at lasting peace must center the restoration of dignity of people of Palestine. An immediate deep analysis and a recovery, a rebuilding and a resourcing of the health system to be able to provide accessible, acceptable, quality care, including expediting of medical evacuations. Reparative justice and as an approach will require a very different kind of solidarity from this room and from this headquarters. And to all of the oppressed people everywhere in the world who are exploited, humiliated, brutalized, and colonized, I fulfill my mandate viscerally aware and understand the compounding, crushing weight of this violence and the issues that you face every day. And I share in the rage and the fury of so many people around the world. I am ashamed and I am deeply sorry that the multilateral world has failed you. And I hope that one day we will share a different collective connection as a humanity that isn't based on experiences of colonial imperialist trauma or what it has taken from us and our people and our collective futures. And I reiterate my call as follows. A genocide is incompatible with the realization of the right of everyone to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need an end to this illegal occupation. We need an end and accountability to this genocide. And that ultimately, colleagues, peace follows liberation. And that you cannot extinguish the human desire for freedom. I thank you, Chair.
Theda, when you were speaking, I couldn't help but try to imagine how I would have felt if I had been talking about my country and describing the things that you described. I don't know how you do it. Journalists ask simple questions, and I often get a question from journalists, how would you describe what is happening? And I'm left speechless. And then I use one word, and only one word: overwhelming. And I mean overwhelming in two senses. What is happening to the Palestinian people of Gaza, and to an increasing but lesser extent on the West Bank, is enormous, unprecedented. It is overwhelming them. And it's overwhelming as well for the rest of us. I mean, for us as investigators, but for all of you as diplomats. What I've been impressed with this week, in the days that we've been here and the meetings that we have had, has been the number of times that all of you cold-hearted, hard-shelled diplomats have said to us how overwhelmed and frustrated and sad you are. I have been moved by the fact that so many of you are personally affected about what is happening. And I'll come back to that. I don't want to go through what we found. All of our reports are there. If you want to read them, you can read them. I want to look at the three issues Ambassador, that you've listed as the themes for this gathering, and not say what we have found, but what we are doing and why. To use this as an opportunity to tell you about the approach that our Commission of Inquiry is taking. One of our terms of reference provides that we look at the underlying root causes of the situation in Palestine and Israel. And for us, that was very much the starting point. We presented our report to the General Assembly, our first report, there's now been 3, in October 2022. And in that report, we described how, for us, the underlying root causes, or at least 2 of them, were occupation and discrimination. We gave our analysis of occupation and formed the view that it was unlawful. That was our conclusion, but we also appreciated that this was a matter of such seriousness that a definitive, authoritative statement of the legality or otherwise of the occupation was required. And so we recommended to you that there be a reference from the General Assembly to the International Court of Justice. And I'll be frank, to my shock, the General Assembly acted on it almost immediately. That reference was made a few weeks after we made the recommendation. The International Court of Justice accepted the analysis that we had undertaken. It did its own analysis, of course, but its reasoning was the same as ours. And as you know, in July, in its opinion, it indicated that the occupation was unlawful. This is certainly one of the root causes and one of the most significant root causes. The court also found that the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination had been historically and continuingly violated as well, and that in fact the occupation and the violation of the right to self-determination were intrinsically linked. The court ordered that the occupation be ended as rapidly as possible, and we were very pleased when the General Assembly took the first steps on that in the resolution in September. Not the last steps, but the first steps. And it was a very rapid response again from the General Assembly to the court's opinion. So for us, a focus on ending the unlawful occupation of Palestine has been a predominant focus in the work that we have done to date. Linked to that has been the question of accountability. Just as we have this explicit term of reference to deal with underlying root causes, so too we are instructed to deal with the issue of accountability. Of course, we have taken that responsibility very seriously. We cooperate with the courts whenever requested and to the greatest extent possible. Under the general arrangement between the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, we have an arrangement, a protocol with the Office of the Prosecutor in relation to the investigation into the situation of Palestine. We provide information to the prosecutor on a monthly basis, and to date have provided over 10,000 pieces of information to assist the prosecutor's investigations. That's part of our responsibility. We collect the information, we verify it, we form conclusions as to the significance of the information in relation to international crimes, and we provide it to the prosecutor. We can also provide information to parties to international litigation cases. We were requested to provide assistance to the government of South Africa in its case under the Genocide Convention before the International Court of Justice. And in response to that request, we also provide information to the government of South Africa relevant to that case. To date, over 6,000 pieces of information. And we will continue to cooperate with judicial processes for accountability in accordance with the responsibility given us by the Human Rights Council. We're very conscious of the importance of that cooperation. For the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, it supplements his own investigative efforts. For the International Court of Justice, it's perhaps even more important, because that court does not have its own investigative arm in the way that the International Criminal Court does. It relies on parties or others, including the United Nations, to provide the evidence on which the court can base its decisions. So in providing evidence to the government of South Africa in relation to its case, we are assisting the court to determine the matter before it. We were particularly pleased that in the advisory opinion on the occupation, the International Court of Justice relied heavily on our own investigations and the conclusions in our reports. The court quoted us extensively and repeatedly. That made us feel even more responsible. We realised the extent to which what we were doing with our investigative work was directly related to accountability. It wasn't just a matter of informing you, member states, or getting a story in the media. It was enabling the court to make judicial decisions, authoritative decisions, on some of the most important issues concerning this situation. We were always very conscious of our accountability function, but certainly became even more so after we saw the extent to which the International Court of Justice is relying on us. So we'll continue that. And our intensive investigative work will continue to be one of the primary focuses of our activities. Largely as a result of that, we have not yet dealt directly with the question of genocide. We are, I must note immediately, enormously grateful to Francesca for the extensive work that she has done on this subject. I don't think there has been more important work on the question of genocide in Palestine done by any other part of the United Nations system than the work that Francesca has done. And I certainly, as a Commissioner on the COI, want to thank her and acknowledge her enormous contribution. We are continuing to build brick by brick our understanding of the issue of genocide. And as we conduct our investigations, we are required to look generally at what we find by way of fact means in terms of law. So, to take an example from our most recent report, when we looked at the question of the destruction, the concerted attempt to destroy the healthcare system in Gaza, and looked at the attacks on reproductive healthcare and on children, particularly neonatal wards, we came to the conclusion that these attacks caused immediate physical and mental harm and suffering to women and girls, and will have irreversible long-term effects on the mental health and physical and reproductive fertility prospects of the Palestinian people as a group. Now, we're aware of the fact that that is one of the 5 categories of act under the Genocide Convention. We're aware of the fact that another category relates to the destruction of the conditions of sustainable life. And our work on healthcare, on housing, and coming up next year on education will be very much looking at the capacity of Palestinian people to sustain life under the circumstances that they have had to endure. So brick by brick, we are looking at this situation, and we will put all the pieces together and present our views. But in the meantime, we are very grateful for the work that Francesca has done. There are 2 particular issues I want to emphasise, however, in relation, Ambassador, to your theme of preventing genocide. There are aspects of the Genocide Convention that give rise to immediate obligations and criminal liability whether or not genocide has occurred or is occurring. It is not necessary to wait for the International Court of Justice to decide the basic question of whether this constitutes genocide before these provisions come into effect. The first is the obligation on all state parties to the Convention to prevent genocide. Whether it is occurring or not, there is an obligation to prevent. And the work that we have done already, and even more, the work that Francesca has done in her reports, clearly activates the obligation to take action to prevent genocide. That obligation is not postponable. The second provision of immediate effect is the prohibition on incitement to genocide, and the fact that incitement is in itself a criminal offence. The incitement need not lead to genocide, and so you can have this criminal offence whether or not genocide is actually committed or occurs. Now, we have listed in our reports, we have quoted statements made by senior political and military leaders in the State of Israel that clearly constitute incitement to genocide. Now, whether or not the Israeli military forces, the Israeli government, is acting on that incitement is a separate, distinguishable and irrelevant question to the criminal offence of incitement to genocide. And there is no reason whatsoever why the International Criminal Court and national courts exercising universal jurisdiction should not be dealing now with the criminal offence of incitement to genocide. And of course, that also contributes to the issue of prevention. I look back at the work that we've done over the last 3 years, and I can point to achievements which make me feel good. The fact that the International Court of Justice has essentially relied on our investigative work. The fact that you, the members of the General Assembly, made the reference when we recommended the reference, and so forth. But this is not a matter on which we pat ourselves on the back. We have to say, at the same time, we have not stopped one child being killed. We have not stopped one woman being killed. We have not stopped the war. And you need to say the same things about the work of the General Assembly and the Security Council. I've been told, rightly, that members of the Security Council are pleased they've passed 4 resolutions since the 7th of October. But they have not stopped a single person being killed. So I don't want you to clap me when you're finished. It was Francesca Feder, Talon, deserved to be clapped. But you clap me when the killing stops and not before, please.
And Ambassador Abdul Hadi, the Special Rapporteurs, and the Commissioner and Mrs. Bhutto for your very, very articulate interventions. For almost 13 months now, we have witnessed the brutality of Israel's settler colonial genocidal assault against the Palestinian people in Gaza. But this is only the most violent manifestation of the ongoing 76-year-long Nakba and the apartheid that has been inflicted upon the entirety of the Palestinian people across the geography and in the diaspora, who are not allowed to return. For those of us who have followed this genocidal onslaught on our screens for the past 13 months, we're all too familiar with the haunting pleas from Palestinian journalists who are being brutally targeted as we speak for broadcasting their own destruction in real time. The first 11 pages of the 649-page list of identified matters released by the Health Ministry in September were names of Palestinian children who hadn't yet reached the age of 1. But you all already know this, and more. Because in line with the UNSC Resolution 2334, since January 2017, the Council and members have received monthly updates on the situation in Palestine. Member states have also been given ample documented evidence through the special procedures, the commissioners, the ICJ, who have all been establishing fact patterns and analyzing them legally. The Palestinians have been documenting this for over 76 years now. So lack of knowledge is really not the concern here. So I will not actually talk about in this intervention, which is an urgent call to action to stop the genocide and end the settler colonial apartheid regime in occupation, upon an appeal to your morality by detailing the loss of Palestinian lives or Palestinians in arbitrary detention, of the extensively documented mass torture or forced displacement or continued starvation and famine. If that was a factor in consideration, we would not have had to witness Palestinian children being blown to smithereens by 2,000-pound bombs. We wouldn't still be here calling for a ceasefire 13 months later. Instead, what I want to do is outline the legal consequences and responsibilities for third states for failing to prevent and punish the crime of genocide that Israel is committing, the illegality of Israel's continued presence in the OPT, tantamount to aggression, its breach of Article 3 of CERD amounting to racial segregation and apartheid, its violation of peremptory norms, including the prohibition of acquisition of territory by force, and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, all of which are legal findings of the International Court of Justice, which is the UN court, your court, findings that the Palestinian people, again, have been articulating for decades now. The ICJ's historic advisory opinion of 19 July rendered the occupation of the Palestinian territory unlawful. The Assembly resolution that followed in September demanded an end to this occupation within a year and called on states to comply with their obligations under international law. The court affirmed that the states have an obligation, not to recognize as legal this situation, including the violation of Article 3 of CERD, and not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation. And even though the ICJ advisory opinion is restricted to the 1967 borders because of the request from the General Assembly, understanding the systematic nature of apartheid and racial segregation means recognizing that it applies to the entirety of the Palestinian people as a whole, including the refugees that have been denied the right of return. The Commission of Inquiry's position paper on the ICJ advisory opinion, which has extensively detailed the obligations of states to act individually and collectively, including by building political, economic, and cultural pressure on the Israeli government to end this unlawful occupation. It also states that member states can be found complicit in the internationally wrongful acts because of aiding and abetting this process. So at this point, after all of these preliminary measures, orders from the ICJ and the advisory opinion, the most basic ask, 13 months in, not least because of the ongoing genocide, is a complete embargo on the boycotting, selling, and transfer of arms, munitions, and related equipment, as outlined in the UNGA resolution. It is not only an obligation that arises from the advisory opinion, but also from the duties of states to prevent and punish the crime of genocide, as outlined in the Convention and the preliminary measures orders in the South Africa versus Israel case. In Nicaragua versus Germany, the ICJ has also reminded member states that both the Genocide Convention, along with all the Geneva Conventions, reiterate this obligation of not to transfer arms to parties of an armed conflict, because otherwise states could be found complicit in this conflict, in this genocide. This restriction on arms also extends to military training, research, development cooperation with Israel that supports the unlawful occupation. And I would add racial segregation and apartheid across the territory. The ICJ, along with states parties that made interventions in the case, also emphasized on the prolonged nature of the occupation, longest in the post-World War II history. This prolonged nature of the occupation, along with the entrenched settler colonial apartheid regime, the infrastructure built around it, the annexation of vast territories, including through illegal settlements and colonies, and legislative changes that have taken place around this, mean that today the possibility of making a distinction between Israel and its operations in the OPT is nearly impossible. The Commission of Inquiry in their position paper also critically identified this burden of proof of making this distinction now lies on Israel. Therefore, third states that are actually dealing with any of these entities in Israel have the obligation to make clear this distinction. Otherwise, they will be found complicit in this wrongful act. Beyond arms, this obligation of non-assistance also includes areas of economic, diplomatic, cultural, and academic relations. Third states are obliged to cease all financial, trade, investment, and economic relations with Israel that maintain or support the unlawful occupation and the apartheid. War economies are usually organized such that making this distinction between financial institutions that are located in Israel and not contributing to the unlawful presence of Israel in the OPT is nearly impossible. Therefore, banks, financial institutions, and other such institutions stand complicit in the maintenance of this unlawful situation, and third states therefore have a duty to not trade with them, to not be complicit in accordance with the ICJ orders. States are also obliged not to provide aid to academic, research, or cultural institutions that support the occupation. And here again, we draw on the extensive work done by Palestinian colleagues and academics for decades now that trace the direct connection between Israeli academia and the armed forces that operate in the OPT, making it impossible to, again, identify this distinction. Where does one stop and the other begin? All these obligations are not just incumbent on states for their own action, but also extend to all persons and corporations that are domiciled in the jurisdictions of states. Having adequate legislation at the national level to hold individuals and corporations that are engaged in rendering aid and assistance to the unlawful situation are therefore prerequisites for states to have in place now. At the same time, having legislation that respects the freedom of expression and assembly and does not criminalize support for Palestinian rights, something that the special rapporteurs have outlined in their statement a few weeks ago, including criminalizing Palestinian support for measures outlined by the ICJ, such as boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, is now in direct contravention to the advisory opinion. Finally, we have witnessed this for decades now, but especially over the last year, Israel has systematically infringed upon its duties towards the UN, violating protections afforded to UN bodies such as UNRWA and UNIFIL, reflected in the unprecedented number of UN staff members killed and the repeated assaults on UN facilities across the geography. The latest Israeli legislation banning UNRWA, as many of you have rightly pointed out, is absolutely outrageous. Other than being in direct contravention to the 3 ICJ preliminary measures orders, this action is also in violation of Article 5 of the UN, 105 of the UN Charter. Condemnation is not sufficient for this absolutely devastating impact that it will have on the Palestinian people. Furthermore, Israel's refusal to engage with UN mechanisms, not allowing visits from special rapporteurs and independent commissions of inquiries, attacking them, declaring the Secretary General persona non grata, flouting rules of the UNGA and multiple Security Council resolutions are all violations of Article 25 of the UN Charter. Therefore, in line with the Charter, member states, for the sake of maintaining international peace and security, must suspend Israel from the UN General Assembly. This is not an exceptional ask. This is not specific to one state or another. It has in fact been undertaken before for the apartheid regime in South Africa and several other states in different forums of the UN. Because we are at a critical juncture now, the stability along with the legitimacy of this post-World War II international legal order is hanging by a thread, if it still exists. This is a direct result of decades of impunity extended to the State of Israel. We as Palestinian civil society organizations, along with our allies, are working on bringing these legal obligations that I have discussed to all the mechanisms available to us internationally, but also and importantly, nationally. Submitting communications to the ICC, to the special procedures, to the commissioners, and bringing national litigation as and where is necessary. The protests on the streets and the campuses and the docks and the weapon factories are visible manifestations of these efforts and a clear sign that this movement will only continue to grow until we reach liberation. The genocide on the ground continues unabated, the occupation worsens, and the apartheid is more entrenched than ever before. How member states that are sitting in this chamber today respond to their legal obligations that have come through all the legal work that has been done, including bringing an end to the occupation, the apartheid, dismantling the settlements and colonies, returning the land back to the Palestinians, allowing Palestinian refugees to return, will only determine the credibility of this institution and this multilateral system in general. And ensuring Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination, liberation, is the only way forward out of the situation we find ourselves in today. Thank you.
Special Rapporteur Francisca Alvarez, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, delegates and other participants for your questions. I will address first the question from the representative of Cuba. What can you do? First of all, having a clear strategy of what is needed. I speak from a very clear standpoint, international law. And what international law obliges you to do is, if you really need to have a scheme, end the genocide. And the genocide is not a war. In order to have a war, I mean, look, I hear you speaking, and I respect you a lot, but something inside me shakes because you're talking of this as if there were two armies confronting each other. If it's a war, if it's a conflict, it's between a people who are trying to resist on the little that remains of their land, frankly, and one of the most powerful armies here in the region. And again, I insist on the settler colonial framework, and I insist on this on the ground that this is how we can read it from an international law point of view, because it's the most basic infringement of the law of self-determination. If you don't understand that this is a settler colonial conflict, then please don't call it a conflict. So, end the genocide. Now, it is to happen now. Then, within the framework, then the General Assembly has said so. Before September next year, end of the occupation, and then long-term end of apartheid. This is what it is to be done. And there are things that you can do. First of all member states, and together with other rapporteurs, I think it was 30 of us, but also the Commission of Inquiry, we have issued recommendations on how to comply with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. So review all engagement and ties that your states have with the State of Israel. And again, it's nothing against the State of Israel per se, it's the State of Israel as a persistent violator of international law. And then arms embargo and other forms of transfers, including oil, have to be suspended. And again, while I look at the West and I'm very critical of the part of the world I come from, many states from the global south still have ties with Israel. And again, we need to have clean hands on this at the moment that genocide is being committed. So these relations have to be suspended. Review political, economic, diplomatic, military, and strategic relations with Israel. Because let's be frank, many states are looking at Israel with a bit of admiration in the way it manages to win over through its gain impunity, go ahead with its impunity. I mean, the way Israel is genociding the Palestinian population is also setting a new model, presenting a new script on how to deal with people who are considered an encumbrance and can be Palestinian, Lebanese, but in another setting, in another country, can be political opponents. This represents a risk for all of us, for all of you. And then accountability. I look at Arab countries as a source of hope. Much more can be done to advance accountability. Join the proceedings initiated by South Africa, please, please. And advance, and also those of you who are party to the Rome Statute, please, please initiate, contribute to the investigation that is being done. This is very powerful and symbolic on top of being technically needed. This is a time to show true solidarity to the Palestinians at the time they're being genocided. Justice also means recognizing the value. I'm so happy to see the BDS movement present here today. I think it's the first time that the BDS is participating in activities of the General Assembly, and this is a sign of how times are changing and changing fast. A number of countries have even criminalized the BDS that in other countries like in South Africa has been strategic in advancing the end of apartheid. More needs to be done, including in Arab countries, to support the BDS, and including in discussing with countries, members of this assembly, which criminalize the BDS. Indonesia asked how the assault on UNRWA and the nail in the coffin was the outlawing the organization through an act of the Israeli parliament. How does it affect, if it can also be seen as part of the genocidal assault on the Palestinian? I think it is, in two respects, and one is very clear. UNRWA does represent a lifeline for the Palestinians in Gaza, not only for what it does and provides, which might be very little compared to the needs, but what it can provide. UNRWA has the capacity to assist the Palestinians in a way that no other agency can. And so the fact of incapacitating UNRWA is going to have a clear, serious humanitarian impact on the already tragic humanitarian situation in Gaza. But also, while cultural genocide is not an element of the crime, jurisprudence is clear that attacking the identity, the sense of life, the sense of collective identity of a people can contribute to identify genocidal intent. And this is what I think is behind the assault on UNRWA that didn't start on October 7. It has been decades of vilification and threats against the agency that now, of course, have escalated.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. Now I go to Special Rapporteur Tlaleng Mofokeng for her final comments.
I just want to reiterate that what is required at the moment is the protection, the promotion of human rights of the Palestinians, and that human rights continue to be a guiding compass and a solution-orientated framework that we should all be behind. And that, in fact, what is required right now is not more practices of benevolence or in kindness, but we need to understand that these are real issues of human rights, of life and death. And from a right to health perspective, Palestinians are entitled to a system of health protection. That means quality health care, but also underlying determinants of health that provide them an equal opportunity for them to enjoy the highest attainable standard of health. And at the moment, they do not have that enjoyment and that right. And in the general comment number 14, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights reiterates that states are obliged to respect the right to health by inter alia refraining from denying or limiting equal access for all persons, including prisoners or detainees, to preventative, curative and palliative health services. And in particular, it states that member states should refrain from limiting access to health services as punitive measure during armed conflict, as well as, of course, as we have now concluded that a genocide is happening to the Palestinian people. And these are immediate obligations, and they include the guarantee of non-discrimination and equal treatment, as well as the obligation to take deliberate, concrete, and targeted steps towards the full realization of the right to health. And all member states have a legal obligation to comply with the ICJ ruling. And therefore it's important, perhaps in a different angle from a right to health, but to also investigate and prosecute those subjects to their jurisdiction who are involved in crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory, including those with dual citizenship who are serving in the Israel military, including mercenaries, and those who are involved in settler violence. And that we do indeed need an immediate ceasefire. We need an end to the illegal occupation and an end to the genocide. I thank you, Chair.
Secondly, on UNRWA, I agree with what has been said, but I just want to make one very brief point on UNRWA. UNRWA has been very diligent in responding to allegations that have been made. There have been investigations. There was action taken in relation to 9 out of in excess of 13,000 staff. When the Israeli Defence Force acts as seriously as UNRWA does in dealing with investigations, then I might take the allegations of the Israeli government more seriously. The issue of complicity has become crystal clear during the course of the last year as a result of the applications for arrest warrants by the prosecutor of the ICC, the provisional measures orders by the International Court of Justice, and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. If there was doubt, there is no longer any doubt. With the reports that the Special Rapporteur has produced, other rapporteurs have produced, our Commission of Inquiry has produced, no one can say now, we did not know. No one can hide behind accidental or willful ignorance. And with the actions taken by the courts, no one can say we don't know what the law is. Aiding or assisting the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, the crimes in the Rome Statute, is a criminal offence in itself. And it's not possible to pretend that we don't know. In fact, the onus has now shifted to those that are involved in any way in relations with the State of Israel. The onus has shifted onto them to examine those relationships and ask the question, is this in any way aiding and assisting the maintenance of the unlawful occupation, the continuation of the unlawful settlements, the displacement of Palestinian people from their land and property? There is an obligation to consider those questions and to prevent action, not only not to take action, but to prevent action if those questions are answered, yes, there is. Is supporting directly or indirectly the occupation and the settlements. The facts are now clear. The law is now clear. The legal obligations are now clear. And we are entitled to expect that this be taken seriously and those who act contrary to law are held accountable.
Accountability towards states, corporations, individuals, institutions is now a legally binding obligation on everybody present here. And it's not just on, and I also want to specifically echo what Commissioner Sidoti said. Let everybody who's doing their jobs do their jobs, including civil society. Repression for following international law norms and outcomes that this General Assembly or this group of states, this UN institutions have created is unacceptable, not just for the sake of Palestinian people and for ensuring their exercise of their inalienable rights to self-determination, but for the legitimacy of this institution. Thank you.
Our colleagues, I have seen here many of our colleagues from member states and many ambassadors here. I really appreciate their presence here. The mere fact of being here is a true testimony of the commitment and the support of this cause. And we also thank those who have taken the floor to make comments, ask questions. We also thank non-member states who have taken the floor to ask questions and show their support. And we also thank all those who have been following us on UN Web TV. Events like these, I think, play an essential role in exposing the staggering level of suffering affecting Palestinians. Our discussion reminds us that we, as the international community, civil society, and individuals alike, we must collectively be relentless in continuing to advocate for a just and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine. I know that there are so many things to be achieved. We seem to be slow in enacting, but the mere fact of having that discussion, this kind of discussion, I think will help us keep the story alive and continue to promote the rights of the Palestinians. This will only stop talking when we come to the end of the Israeli occupation that began in 1967, and this only will be stopping when we will witness one day, and wish that the day happens as soon as possible, the realization of the self-determination and independence of the Palestinian people. The world cannot fail the Palestinians in their legitimate aspirations for freedom. But before closing, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasser, from the State of Palestine, for her few final comments, if she wants to do so. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for your moving presentations, to all of our briefers, and to all of the delegations and civil society representatives here for your compelling calls for action, for accountability, and for your solidarity with the Palestinian people in the face of decades of injustice and crimes that shame and haunt us all. But today we've heard not only unprecedented calls for accountability, but we are seeing growing efforts by governments, by UN bodies, by civil society, and by millions of people around the world standing against this inhumanity and seeking to act together to end this historic injustice. And the coalition that was mentioned by Diana, that must be strengthened. Our efforts must converge with immediate, tangible, legal, and political actions to end Israel's wanton violations of international law and crimes against the Palestinian people, and to assist them to realize their rights, including to return and to self-determination, and to realize the justice and freedom they have long been struggling for. And so, Mr. Chair, I wish to close with an expression of gratitude for the empathy, the solidarity, and the support extended to the Palestinian people, but also an appeal for that empathy and solidarity and support to carry on. Do not, please, do not forsake the Palestinian people. Do not take for granted their resilience on the front lines of this epic assault on humanity and the international legal order in its entirety. Do not succumb to the intimidation, to the incitement, to the reckless allegations of anti-Semitism. Do not accept the mocking and disrespect of your countries, your principles, our multilateral system, and our global family. Do not allow Israel to destroy the international system painstakingly established nearly 80 years ago. Do not become numb to the inhumanity, to the impunity. Do not normalize the depravity, the killing of babies, children, women, and men. Do not normalize genocide. Stop arming, stop funding, stop supporting this genocide and illegal occupation. Stop the complicity and double standards. Stop justifying this genocide, which nothing can justify. Not October 7th, nothing. Please continue to act with all the legitimate tools we have to insist on right over might, to protect and provide sustenance to the Palestinian people, including by protecting and sustaining UNRWA, to bring an end to this nightmare our people have suffered for too long, to end this Nakba, to end this illegal occupation and apartheid regime, to liberate them from decades of oppression and persecution, to uphold the promise of international law and our collective humanity for the Palestinian people, but also for the future of all peoples in every corner of the world. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Feda Abdel Nasser, for your very strong and moving remarks. We heard you. As per usual practice, the chair summary of this briefing will be posted on the website of the committee at www.unespal.un.org. The video recording of this event will be also available on UN Web TV and on the committee's YouTube channel. Let me remind you that you can also follow the committee on our website at unespal.un.org, on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can also join our mailing list to receive the committee newsletters and to stay up to date with the committee's activities. For your information, as part of its efforts to contribute towards a just, comprehensive, and lasting settlement of the question of Palestine, the committee will observe the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on Tuesday, the 26th of November, 2024. The special commemorative meeting of the committee will be held in person at this room, at the ECOSOC chamber, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Observances will also take place at the UN offices at Geneva, Nairobi, and Vienna. We look forward to your ongoing engagement and to welcome you in our future activities. Once again, a warm thank you to our panelists, and we thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.